Hello, Lauren.
Hello, Dan.
It's like all in the family these days.
It's so fun. I
I
love
know.
it.
As everybody remembers, we got to visit with Lee Van Ham, Lauren's dad, last week. That was great. And of course, did the podcast with Lee this week. So that will be posting up on the 25th. And this morning, we get to have a conversation with Lauren. So just so happy to have you, Lauren.
Great to be with you. Hello, Our Savior's Lutheran and community.
Yeah. And you've been on site before, so you know who you're talking to. So that's an awesome thing. Well, Lauren, we are excited to have you today. I know we've got a little bit of time with you today, and one of the things that we wanted to explore with you, if we in this conversation, particularly because we're getting ready for winter solstice, and many of us who long to have a physical celebration are unable to do that because of COVID-19. In fact, just the other night, Lori and I got together with just another couple and had our little mini solstice celebration on the Labyrinth at church at night. So that was beautiful. But we also want to just let people have a way to kind of enter into the way in which they feel their kind of soul's interconnectivity with the natural world, and to kind of hear from you, from the perspective you bring as an eco-chaplain, to how people might understand that more deeply, maybe experience it more deeply, how it sort of affects your spiritual trajectory and kind of where you're at today as you continue to kind of allow that to inform your soul's journey. So those are the conversation. That's a conversation I hope to have with you today. So let's see where it goes, shall we?
Dive in. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk because we haven't talked in a long time, but we could save that for another time. Let me start by asking the question. You know, in so many religious practices, we often kind of start, obviously, by thinking about the natural world from the starting place of our own spiritual or religious tradition. And then we look at the stories in that religious tradition, the story of creation or Noah and the flood, or the way in which Jesus' parables kind of guide us into a relationship with earth and seasons and growth and all the beauty that's there. So oftentimes we start kind of from a religious framework, and then we apply that religious framework to the natural world. And it feels like you have another way of also kind of exploring spirituality that moves the other direction, that pays more attention to the natural world and then lets it give shape to our spiritual life, as if it's kind of moving, the momentum is shifting the other way. It's like gift from planet to us. How can you kind of unpack that for us as someone who serves as an eco-chaplain, and help us to kind of wrap our heart and soul around that energy that moves in that direction?
Great. I believe that we really stand in solidarity with Jesus or Lao Tzu or Mohammed when we do approach it in the way that you're suggesting it, Dan, because I think all of those guys were eco-chaplains. I think that they, like us, were walking on earth and trying to make sense of existence. And certainly there was an understanding that there was mystery. There was something much larger than us that we might call God. But it was the what was tangible around us and what was so vast before us that became our best metaphor for making sense of it. And so I think in a lot of ways, it was these eco-chaplains who, these first eco-chaplains who led us into this experience. And then, you know, humans being humans and a little anthropocentric, we wrote these sacred texts and we documented things, and it's great that we did. It's just that sometimes those sacred texts end up getting us there in sort of a backwards route, because the sacred text is also as soon as we walk out our front door.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say that we, in a sense, because we are a bit anthropocentric, we ended up writing ourselves, or our projection of ourselves maybe, into the dynamism of spirituality that that maybe was inspired by this relationship with the natural world, but maybe that was a little too heavy-handed. Or how would you describe that to people?
That's interesting. I mean, I think again, I think we're always doing the best we can with what we've got.
Mm-hmm.
And the metaphors and the symbols in all of these stories. I mean, Noah and the Great Flood is such an important story for any of us who are currently living this extractive, exploitive, polluting life on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
The Earth is saying, stop, slow down, or like the biodiversity is going to be lost.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think when humans see ourselves in that story, we document it and we say, hey, like, take heed, let's not ever do this again.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing you say that we, in some ways, our relationship with the planet becomes or is sort of that primary experience, and then as we live into that experience and being kind of cultured people who can find language and metaphor and images to be able to describe that, that is a kind of it's almost like a dance we have as thinking beings with this kind of primary connection to the sacred world we think of as the earth or the cosmos. That's what I'm hearing you say.
So well said.
Yeah.
That's so well said. Because, I don't know what it's like to be in the mind of a hippo or the mind of a tree.
Right.
They might be doing some version of this too. But this is the way that we cogitate. This is the way that we're doing it. And it can be a bit problematic, as we all know. But some really good things have come out of it too.
Right. I love that idea. I hadn't thought about that till you just said it. Like, what is the spirituality of the hummingbirds or the eagle or the tree or the plant? I hadn't, to wonder that they too have some sort of, intimate bond with their ecosystem that probably manifests itself in their own spirituality. I just hadn't thought about that.
And how can they not? It is the invitation for us to ponder that, to be with that.
I wonder, I remember, I know this is a little bit off track, but I remember one of the Buddha's final sermons was no words, but simply a handing of a flower, as I recall, to one of his disciples. And, I wonder if there was more deep truth in that. Like, it's all there. You don't have, you can use language, but you don't need language to be able to have this kind of intimate awareness of the kind of spirit conversation that's happening all the time, everywhere, in all beings, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think, that's it. It's, this is what I found on my walk today.
Yes, talk about that.
Just, this sweet green with these baby pine cones was destitute on the sidewalk. And I just thought, I have greens at home that you can come and be family with instead of just dying here alone on the sidewalk by yourself. That's so awesome. This is it, right? Yeah. I think for the Buddha to be sitting in front of a throng of people and to have the opportunity to say all kinds of things, and instead to hold up a flower and let the flower speak, we would be wise to take heed.
Yeah. Well, you just gave that sermon yourself, so thanks for that. How so given that framing, now let's move into kind of the idea of solstice, which for me has so much energy in it. And I think obviously because it's linked to this time of year where Christmas for Christians comes in, where, we're waiting for what we have called the light of the world to be born. We have this whole light imagery around Christmas time. I've got all my Christmas lights up Christmas lights in the evergreen. I mean, we have that kind of notion. And here we are entering into solstice, the longest of the nights. That is this breaking point, of the deepest, darkest beauty of night. And then that slow journey into springtime. How do you find meaning in this celebration of solstice, particularly as it kind of gives shape to your spiritual perspective or your religious insights or your soul's journey? Well, how do you link those two together?
Yeah. So what's so stirring to me about the winter solstice is I think about the earliest humans who didn't have any science, didn't have documentation. And for a period of time, I mean, they're keen observers, right? They live so close to the earth, and they see that the sun is shining for fewer minutes every day.
Yeah.
Wow. And is there going to be a point where it just doesn't come back?
Right. Yeah.
Because we need it, right? I mean, this is our light, this is our warmth. And so through this keen observation, I can imagine this sense of foreboding, and no wonder they were praying, they were dancing, they were doing all they can to petition and say, please don't go, please come back. And so, okay, over time, of course, they start to realize that the sun does come back and the days start to get longer. Thank goodness.
Right. Exactly.
But those rituals stayed. It became clear that there was something about taking our souls through this process of really being in relationship with the dark, of coming to grok it and appreciate it and to see what's there for us, so that we can, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, at the end of the year, release the patterns that are no longer serving, to put these stories that aren't helpful into the compost bin, and to welcome the return of the light. There's nothing to be afraid of in the dark. The dark is our teacher, but this time of year really allows us to be in it. And there's just so much wisdom there.
Yeah, I love that. I love too that for me, the solstice also reminds me of that it's like a trigger point to remind me that the seasons, that the planetary system that holds us provides for us these seasons that, like you said, are cycles, right? That I can trust in them. And then it gives me some freedom to, like what you said, kind of allow myself to let things go, because I know I've learned, and I celebrate as well, right? That springtime is on the way, and that this pattern is going to this life pattern is going to happen. And then that the entire planet is in resonance with these seasons, right? So the trees lose their leaves and the plants wilt and stuff goes underground. And I'm like, oh my gosh, everything that holds me is in this same relationship to these seasonal patterns. And how can I not, as Drew Dellinger says in one of his poems, how can I not but dance, in that relationship, and sing and love and, feel the energy of life? How can I not but dance in that pattern? It's just so unbelievable. Beautiful. Yeah. How do you think, I don't remember why, I don't know that I've ever even asked you this of all the years I've known you, but when you shifted to being, a classic reverend to being an eco-chaplain, what changed in the trajectory of your own spirituality, if you can remember back, that you think is beneficial to you when you kind of added that? No, not added, because you've given yourself to that awareness. Can you remember back on, like, what were some of the early things that showed up for you as you did that? If people are interested in kind of incorporating more of that into their own spiritual practice or awareness, what might be there for them that they don't even know exists yet? Do you have any insight, or can you remember what were some of those kind of experiences that came on board when you made that shift from just classic clergy person to eco-chaplain?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think I was always an eco-chaplain.
Oh.
I think, since being a kid on my grandparents' farm, or camping with my family in the summers in Rocky Mountain National Park, there were mentors along the way who made it very clear to me that when I was in church with the stained glass windows, or when I was in the mountains, it was sort of same. So that shift that you're talking about, it was sort of, it was kind of a coming out experience. It was sort of like,
so it was already inside of you.
I don't need to compartmentalize these things anymore. And maybe,
oh, that's good.
Maybe that's the invitation,
Yeah.
for everyone is to sort of just free your inner eco-chaplain, allow them to come out and express themselves how they wish to.
Yeah, that you stumbled into that without knowing. I think you're right. It is. What did you say? This you didn't have to silo those two experiences.
I didn't have to compartmentalize.
That's right. It. Yeah, you could add them together. You could be both a Buddha with parable and a Buddha with flower in hand at the same time.
Just like they were, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's very free. That's totally liberating, in my opinion. I think on two different fronts. One is that given the state of the environment right now, if we can't reclaim or maybe add to the experience of nature that sort of capacity for it being a spiritual experience, then how will we have the heart to make the hard changes that are required to get back in line with the natural world more fully, right? I do think now is the time to sort of to integrate the two without feeling like you're going to lose one or the other. I wonder if people fear that they're going to turn into kind of a Wiccan priestess if they do that. And then, there goes my Sunday morning experience. That hasn't been the case for you.
No, it hasn't. And I think that I think you're right, that there's a lot of anxiety around that mm-hmm. We can get so kind of polarized and dualistic. We're Westerners, we sort of do that. But if we can, the metaphor I always use is, can I let the peas touch the carrots? Like, can I just let things get a little bit messy? Because probably things are going to be all right. It might even taste good. Who knows,
Talk about boiling it down to the simplest imagery possible. Peas and carrots, peas and carrots, peas and carrots, peas and carrots. I don't have to be polarized about everything on my plate. That one's going to stick with me, Lauren. I like that one. All right, one more. I don't know how much time. Let me see. Let me look at the time. I can hardly. Yes, for a little bit. We got a little bit more time.
We're fine. Yeah.
Oh, geez, you're so easy. Talk to me a little bit about, so if you are bringing those two traditions together, and let's just call them traditions, right? So the tradition, our long evolutionary tradition of being in a spiritual relationship with the planet, and our culturally constructed images and metaphors that we now call our religious experience, our traditional religious experiences. If we were to allow both to be on the plate together, peas and carrots, peas and carrots, peas and carrots, I do think you're getting some insight into how my mind works here. So if we're able to do that, let me get to the point here. Oh yeah, could you think about some of the kind of classic ways in which we articulate our spirituality through our traditional religious frames, like forgiveness or redemption or reconciliation or communion? And can you, or are there ways in which you can see those playing out in the relationship with the natural world? So, so rather than always think about carrying all of the spiritual insights from our relationship to the natural world into our religion, are there kind of things that we have thought about in abstract that could go back into our experience with nature? Does that make sense? That question
makes so much sense. And I think what I want to underscore is that in light of what you said a few minutes ago, we have to do that, Dan. This moment is so important for humans to start to do what you just said. And I want to kind of give two examples.
Yeah, that'd be great.
In my spiritual direction practice, I'm seeing clients, usually one-on-one, and sometimes they're presenting a difficult decision. Sometimes they're showing up with a ton of grief about something they've lost. And in those situations, kind of the logos mind doesn't always come up with the best medicine. Sometimes we
Mm.
sort of sit there without words and a little puzzled. And I think one of our best resources in that moment is to think about the living system. So that when I'm puzzling over this decision, or I'm hanging out with huge despair, where in the living system is this reflected back to me? Where in the ecology do I see this? And almost always there's an example. A little bit like you saying, wow, I'm realizing that the trees are experiencing the winter solstice the same way I am, and I have community here. So I think that that's really important. I think that that's instead of humans, again, anthropocentrically kind of moving our way through it and trying to grok it, what if we allowed the living system to teach us how to be with our depression, to show us how to make a difficult decision? Almost always there's a teaching in nature.
And do you find, and before you move to that, because you had two examples, do you find that the client, so to speak, what is the experience that the client then engages in? Is there some sort of methodology to allowing for that you invite them into?
Yeah, I mean, if we're outside, which sometimes I'm seeing clients outside, especially now in
right.
COVID times.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can find something just looking around us. Often there's relief. There's an epiphany, there's new energy, and kind of saying, oh, right, that's my dog actually taught me that. Or there's this tree, and I'm going to go grieve and be with this tree. I'm going to give this to the tree. So whatever sort of ritual might come out of the moment, sometimes there's levity, sometimes there's catharsis. But there's a place to put it. There's a place to be with it.
It's interesting to listen to you talk. We interviewed Amber, the fire dancer from Winter Solstice, in our podcast series a week ago. And she was talking about how she allows her body to kind of connect to the natural world. And she had this line, I think she goes, your body will know. It's like you turn to the natural world, whether you're looking for a place that invites you into deep relationship or that matches maybe something that you're working through, your body will feel where that connecting place is, like what you were describing. And I'm not sure that many of us have experience with that, but people who I've talked to who do that as a practice, they clearly get it. That your body can know this other body that holds you in an intimate way. So just trust it. Pretty powerful.
So wise.
Yeah.
So
what was you had another example? Did you have another example?
I mean, that's a good segue into my next example. I was thinking about communion, actually.
Yeah. Yes.
So when I was a hospital chaplain, I was working in a Catholic hospital. There were patients and nurses who just didn't feel like their day was complete if they hadn't received Eucharist. It was a daily ritual. It was so important. And communion requires us to, before we receive the Eucharist, kind of empty ourselves a bit, to reflect, maybe to think about where we missed the mark this week, where did I drop the ball yesterday, how can I humble myself and be with spirit and get filled up and go back out there and try again to do my best. What if when we walked into our backyard or locked the car in the parking lot to head into Muir Woods, what if we said to creation, I know I've really destroyed you in a lot of ways with the way that I live on this planet, but I'm coming into your creation today to really respectfully listen to whatever it is that you want to show me. I just want to be attentive. I guarantee the Eucharist will be so complete. I guarantee the birds will sound different, that the trees will look different, that you will notice a bee or a fox that you might not have seen otherwise. this, I think, is the kind of humility and promise that is being offered to us if we understand that our relationship with nature is sacramental.
Wow, I get it. That one's good. Well, everything you've said is good, but that's pretty rich. When I heard you talking, we had Drew Dellinger as well share some of his poetry, and he had a line in one of his poems. He was talking about the cosmos, and the two terms came up inside his poetry about the natural world. This is my body, and this is my blood. And I was like, what is he doing with that? And it's exactly what you're talking about. This sort of invitation to see that level of communion inside our relationship with the natural world is buried inside of one of his pieces of poetry, which was just absolutely spectacular. I could hear his poem as you described what you were describing. I think that's what you're inviting us into, which is beautiful.
It doesn't have to be difficult, right?
No, yeah, right. But to think in terms of, you use the term a sacramental relationship, and maybe can you say a little bit more about that? Because I think I know what you mean, but if someone were to go, what do you mean exactly by that? Could you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. When I use the word sacramental, I'm thinking about sacred. I'm thinking about kind of these thresholds, the sacrament of marriage, the sacrament of baptism. These are these thresholds.
Like sacred thresholds. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so instead of, just as easily as communion in church could become kind of rote, and just a pattern and now we do this thing. Mm-hmm. The same thing can be true when we're walking around the neighborhood, but it doesn't have to be. If I'm willing to just empty myself out a little bit first and tune in and ask permission in the way that I might before the liturgy in worship, I guarantee you that walk around the block is going to have a different meaning than it would have otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. Well, Lauren, I think that's a beautiful place to kind of end this conversation, because I wanted to move that whole trajectory of sort of what is an eco-chaplain to how do we all embrace our own inner eco-chaplain, which I think you've taken us on that lovely journey this morning, and I totally appreciate that. And it's also just a great experience to have you in conversation with all of us during this time of celebration of solstice. So for people to kind of take it a little bit more seriously during this moment, since it's filled with its own natural kind of energy, this is a beautiful moment to pay attention to that sort of thing. Give it a try. Wander outside on the night of solstice on the 21st to see where that might become for you a sacramental moment or a sacred moment. Is just awesome. All right, Lauren, just I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to finish up our conversation together with folks by reading some of Drew's poetry.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and just not a lot of it, but just enough to give them a taste. He obviously does such a great job, I think. And I believe you know him quite well, too. He just does such a great job blending poetics, justice, environment, cosmology in a mashup that feels like the song of the universe, right? And he just does it so well.
Yes, so. He's a treasure.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you all so much, Dan and community, for letting me be with you in this very auspicious time of year. And blessings on your solstice. It's only going to be more potent tomorrow because of this Jupiter-Saturn thing that's happening.
I've been hearing of that. Yeah.
There will be a North Star for all of us to walk toward with our gifts. And I encourage you to get out there tomorrow night and be in the dark.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren.
Right. Blessings all. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Whew. Well, like I want to breathe for a couple of minutes after that conversation. I've known Lauren for a while now, and I have such deep respect for her. And I remember the first time I had a conversation with her, it was like someone lifted a veil. I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? And it was some of my early experiences of trying to acknowledge and not fully integrate, because I don't know that I've fully integrated, but at least begin the integration process of how do I tend to the natural world and to my own religious tradition and to how they play together, and honoring them both. She was really kind of the genesis of a lot of that for me. And I think you can see in hearing her this morning why that is. What great wisdom she brings. To close out our time together, I wanted to do two things. One is to read a piece of poetry. This isn't the whole piece of poetry, but it's the introduction to the poem called Solstice that Drew Dellinger read and reflected on during our podcast that we had. And two things. In the announcement time, I'm going to encourage you to listen to that podcast because it's just such a beautiful coming together of three people reflecting on what solstice means to them and how they have done what Lauren is talking about, right? Thinking about the relationship with earth and planet and stars and nature and tree and bird and plant and each other, and living into the reality of that the best they can without constructing sort of this sort of rigorous boundary line between how they understand sacred and how they understand secular. It just becomes one big conversation. Drew puts it beautifully in his poem called Solstice, which he spells S-O-U-L, stis, rather than S-O-L for sun. What does it mean to have a solstice? For our soul to pause for a moment, like it feels like the sun pauses for a moment on winter solstice before we begin the long journey into winter sleep on our way to the gift of springtime year after year after year. And how do we do that with the planet and the cosmos itself? So just a few lines from Solstice. Every ounce of matter is frozen light. Roses, clouds, bones, tears, all slowly moving light. Everything is shining in glory, everything singing a story. And if love is a language, then I'm just learning to spell, while there's a story that the stars have been burning to tell. Isn't that beautiful? A great piece of poetry. I would encourage you maybe even to get the book called A Love Letter to the Milky Way, a book of poems by Drew Dellinger. I can put a link to that in our feed as well. Just a lovely way to have by your bedside or while you have your cup of coffee, to allow poetry to guide you into the relationship with the earth, as well as the earth inviting you into that relationship. Thanks for being part of this particular series, and particularly for Lauren for reminding us to get out there and be in the dark. I would invite you to think about ways, even though the solstice has passed us at this point, to think about ways in which you kind of enter into the natural world that allows you some kind of spiritual wiggle room, right? That lets you feel the world through you. And I think if I reflect back on all the 4 episodes we've had, and the fire dancer, the poet, the singer-songwriter, Lee Van Ham, Lauren Van Ham, the Eco-Chaplain, that's the one takeaway I will carry, is how do I open my front door and go outside with my ears open, my senses aware, listening to what the world is trying to speak to me as I engage in my daily activities. And not just seeing that as an observer, but allowing it to kind of sink more deeply into who I am, how I self-identify, how I see my place, my experience in the world more fully. You know, in many ways, we've all grown a little bit detached from the natural world. We've surrounded ourselves with almost like a cushion of technology and comfort. You know, our minds and our hearts and our bodies are wrapped up in other things than the natural world. And so how do you allow that energy of the cosmos to kind of flow through you on a daily basis, so you really feel more a part of the very cosmos that holds us all? Hopefully this series and the episodes that you've listened to have allowed you some access points to the way in which you engage that experience as well. We'll see you next week as we start a new series. Thanks for listening to Soul Forum. Always appreciate any comments or suggestions you have. You can reach out to us just simply by sending us an email to soulforum@oslc.net, and we'll try to pay attention to some of your reflections as well as we continue this journey together. Be well.